The wind hits you before you even open your eyes. It seeps through the seams of your shelter. It finds the gap between your fur and your skin. It is minus 30 degrees outside, and the fire you built last night has burned down to a small orange glow barely the size of your fist. You have maybe 10 minutes before your fingers stop working properly. This was the reality for your ancestors for over 100,000 years. Not a week of brutal weather, not a bad winter season. 100,000 years of cold so severe it reshaped entire continents, wiped out entire species, and nearly erased the human line from the planet entirely. And they survived it. How? The last glacial maximum, which scientists use to describe the coldest peak of the most recent ice age, occurred roughly 21,000 years ago. At that point, ice sheets covered nearly a third of the entire land surface of the Earth. Sea levels were more than 400 feet lower than they are today. What is now the English Channel was dry land. You could have walked from Siberia to Alaska. Entire ecosystems that exist today simply did not exist. Your ancestors lived in all of it. To understand how, you have to stop thinking about the Ice Age the way movies have taught you to imagine it. It was not a single frozen moment. It was a slow, grinding, multi-generational shift that your ancestors had to adapt to in real time across thousands of years with nothing but stone tools, animal furs, fire, and each other. The first tool in their survival arsenal was not a weapon, it was knowledge. In the 1960s, anthropologist Richard Lee conducted years of fieldwork with the Yuhuansi people of the Kalahari, one of the last hunter-gatherer populations on Earth. What he found astonished the academic world at the time. These people, living in an extremely harsh environment, did not spend every waking hour scrambling for survival. They possessed an encyclopedic, inherited knowledge of their landscape, which plants fruited when, which animal movements predicted weather shifts, which dry riverbeds still held water underground. They worked on average around 15 to 20 hours per week to meet all their nutritional needs. Your Ice Age ancestors had the same kind of knowledge, scaled to a frozen world. Archaeologists studying sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, a Gravettian settlement dating back roughly 26,000 years, found evidence of something remarkable. These people were not wandering randomly hoping to stumble across food. They were following systematic, seasonal migration routes. They knew where the mammoth herds would move in autumn. They knew which river valleys would stay partially ice-free. They understood their world with the same depth that a modern farmer understands a field, except their field was the size of a continent. But knowledge alone does not keep you warm. Clothing was the second critical survival layer. And here is where your ancestors did something that almost no other species on Earth managed to do. They invented tailored insulation. Analysis of Paleolithic tools, specifically bone needles found at sites like Sungir in Russia, dated to around 34,000 years ago, tells us that your ancestors were not simply draping animal hides over their shoulders. They were cutting and stitching complex fitted garments. The same site contained burials of 2 children dressed in clothing decorated with thousands of individual ivory beads, each one carefully carved and sewn into place. That level of detail tells researchers that this was not just functional clothing. It was culturally significant. It was an identity. It was a community. The bone needles at Sungir are roughly 3 inches long and paper thin, with a small drilled eye at one end. The fact that they existed at all means your ancestors were sewing layered, overlapping garments that could trap body heat the same way modern technical outerwear does today. Archaeology professor Olga Soffer, who has spent decades studying Paleolithic textiles and fiber crafts, argues that woven plant fiber clothing likely predates our evidence for it, because organic materials rarely survive tens of thousands of years. The tailoring technology, though, is undeniable. They were dressed better than most people imagine. But even perfect clothing fails if you cannot generate heat from inside your body, and generating heat requires calories. This is where the megafauna comes in. Megafauna is the technical term for the enormous animals that roamed the Ice Age world. Woolly mammoths, cave bears, giant ground sloths, Irish elk with antlers spanning 12 feet. These were not just impressive animals. They were walking calorie warehouses, and your ancestors hunted them systematically. At Boxgrove in southern England, a site excavated by paleoarchaeologist Mark Roberts in the 1990s, researchers found butchered horse bones dating back roughly 500,000 years, along with stone hand axes and clear-cut marks that indicated highly organized group hunting. The evidence suggests your ancestors were not simply scavenging carcasses. They were coordinating ambush hunts, using landscape features like cliffs and river bends to funnel animals into kill zones. Mammoth hunting in particular required a level of social coordination that rivals anything you would find in a modern organization. These animals weighed up to 14,000 pounds. A single mammoth could feed a group of 20 people for weeks, but taking one down required planning, communication, role assignment, and trust. It required a group to function as a single organism, and that group was the third, and perhaps most essential, survival tool your ancestors had: the band, the tribe. Human beings are not particularly fast. We are not especially strong. Our teeth are mediocre. Our claws are embarrassing. What we have is each other, and your Ice Age ancestors understood this at a level that was quite literally built into the structure of their daily lives. Anthropologist Kim Sterelny, who studies the evolution of human cooperation, argues that the survival of anatomically modern humans through the Ice Age was not primarily a physical achievement. It was a social one. Groups that shared food reliably, that pooled specialized knowledge, that cared for injured and elderly members rather than abandoning them, those groups survived. The archaeological evidence backs this up. At several Ice Age sites, researchers have found skeletal remains of individuals who survived serious injuries, limb fractures, even missing limbs, for years after those injuries occurred. One skeleton, found at Shanidar Cave in Iraq, dating back roughly 65,000 years and belonging to a Neanderthal, showed a withered arm, extensive trauma to the skull and eye socket, and severe arthritis. Yet this individual had survived for decades past the point where those injuries would have been fatal without sustained care from others. They did not survive alone. Nobody survived alone. So let us reconstruct a single winter day, roughly 20,000 years ago, somewhere in what is now southern France. You wake before dawn. The shelter around you is a semi-permanent structure built against a limestone cliff face, the overhang providing natural protection from wind and snow. Inside, a central fire burns low. 8 other people sleep nearby on layers of woven grass and animal hide. You can hear the breathing of children tucked against their mothers. You can smell rendered fat and dried meat. Someone in your group, probably an elder, is already awake, feeding the fire from a stack of wood that was gathered and dried weeks earlier. Fuel management is not a chore. It is a survival discipline. Running out of dry firewood in midwinter is a death sentence. By mid-morning, a hunting group of 4 adults has left the camp following a dried riverbed south, toward a valley where mammoth tracks were spotted 2 days ago. The rest of the group stays close to the shelter, scraping and stretching hides, repairing clothing, watching the children. Every task has a purpose. Every hour of daylight is accounted for. By late afternoon, the hunting group returns without a kill, but with information. The herd has moved east. The group discusses it around the fire. Someone draws a rough map in the dirt. A decision is made. Tomorrow, you move camp. And this is what survival actually looked like. Not a single dramatic moment of heroism. Not one genius inventing fire in a moment of inspiration. It was cumulative, distributed, quietly extraordinary group intelligence, practiced every single day for thousands of years. There is one more layer to this story that most people miss entirely. Your ancestors did not just endure the Ice Age mentally, they flourished in it. The Chauvet Cave in southern France, discovered in 1994 and dated to roughly 36,000 years ago, contains some of the most breathtaking art in human history. Lions, bears, rhinoceroses, horses, drawn in flowing charcoal lines with a sophistication that took the art world completely off guard. These were not primitive scratchings. These were accomplished artists working by firelight inside a cave at the height of the last Ice Age, creating images with shading, perspective, and motion. Researcher Jean Clotz, who has spent decades studying Paleolithic cave art across Europe, argues that these images represent not just artistic expression, but a rich inner life, a cosmology, a spiritual relationship between humans and animals that sustained communities through generations of hardship. The art is a window into a mind that was not diminished by extreme conditions. It was sharpened by them. That mind is your mind. The capacity for knowledge transfer that kept your ancestors from freezing is the same capacity that built libraries. The tailoring instinct that turned animal skins into layered garments is the same instinct that built the textile industry. The social glue that held Ice Age bands together through months of frozen darkness is the same force that builds every company, every family, every city you have ever been part of. You wake up this morning in a heated home. You have a stocked kitchen. You have a phone with access to virtually all of human knowledge. And somewhere in the structure of your brain, built over 100,000 years of surviving the impossible, you still carry the instinct for fire, for shelter, for the person next to you. The wind never stopped. Your ancestors just got better at listening to it.